On March 15, 2003, Detroit's business community faced a brutal double homicide. Michael Carpenter and James Wilson, prominent real estate developers, were found dead in their downtown office. Both victims had been shot multiple times at close range in the evening hours, according to the Wayne County Medical Examiner's report. Detroit Police Department, led by Detective Steve Gordon, quickly focused their investigation on Derek Johnson and his father Larry Johnson, African-American residents from the North End neighborhood. The Johnsons, who ran a small auto repair shop, had no prior criminal record except for a minor traffic violation. The prosecution built their case on three key pieces of evidence: a .45 caliber handgun recovered from the Johnsons' home, which ballistics confirmed as the murder weapon. Derek's fingerprints were found on the gun. The critical testimony came from Charlotte Green, who claimed she saw Derek Johnson leaving the crime scene during the estimated time of the murders. The case moved swiftly through the judicial system under Judge James Miller in the Wayne County Circuit Court. The defense team attempted to challenge the evidence, particularly questioning the chain of custody for the recovered weapon. However, Judge Miller consistently ruled in favor of the prosecution's motions. During the trial, Larry Johnson attempted to expose what he believed was corruption in the investigation. He claimed Detective Gordon and his team had planted evidence and coerced witnesses. These allegations led to additional charges against Larry for attempted witness tampering. After a 3-week trial, the jury found both men guilty. Judge Miller sentenced Derek Johnson to death, citing the premeditated nature of the murders and their impact on Detroit's business community. Larry Johnson received a 20-year sentence for being an accessory to murder and attempting to interfere with witnesses. The investigation records, reviewed years later, revealed serious misconduct by the police department. Detective Gordon and officers Ronald White and Jonathan Bates had fabricated evidence, including planting the murder weapon and falsifying fingerprint analysis reports. Charlotte Green later admitted in a sworn affidavit that Detective Gordon had paid her $5,000 to provide false testimony about seeing Derek at the crime scene. The wrongful conviction of the Johnsons exemplified systemic corruption within Detroit's criminal justice system during the early 2000s. Despite multiple appeals and new evidence suggesting their innocence, Derek Johnson remained on death row at Michigan State Penitentiary, while his father began serving his sentence at the Chippewa Correctional Facility. The prosecution team worked to dismiss growing concerns about potential evidence tampering. They maintained that both physical evidence and eyewitness testimony conclusively proved the Johnsons' guilt. The Internal Affairs Department, tasked with investigating Larry Johnson's allegations of police misconduct, quickly cleared all officers involved of any wrongdoing. Local media coverage at the time largely supported the prosecution's narrative. Few journalists questioned the rapid resolution of the case or the circumstantial nature of the evidence. The prevailing story portrayed the Johnsons as opportunistic criminals who had targeted successful businessmen. Several defense attorneys later noted significant irregularities in how the case was handled. The speed with which evidence was processed, the pressure applied to potential witnesses, and the unusual resistance to standard defense discovery requests all pointed to orchestrated misconduct. However, these concerns were systematically dismissed by the presiding judge. After serving 20 years, Larry Johnson was released from Chippewa Correctional Facility in January 2023. Inside the prison walls, he had received devastating news in 2008. His son Derek had been executed by lethal injection at Michigan State Penitentiary. The appeals process had failed, and the state proceeded with the death sentence despite ongoing concerns about evidence tampering and witness credibility issues. Following his release, Larry discovered that his wife Kimberly had died in 2015. Medical reports indicated she suffered a fatal heart attack, brought on by severe depression and prolonged stress from the wrongful convictions of her husband and son. Prison officials had withheld this information from Larry at Kimberly's request, as she hadn't wanted to burden him with her declining health while he served his sentence. The loss of both his son and wife while he was imprisoned had left Larry with nothing but thoughts of retribution. Larry spent several weeks tracking Ronald White, the former police officer who had falsified the fingerprint evidence in Derek's case. White had left the Detroit Police Department in 2010 during internal investigations into evidence tampering. Though he avoided criminal charges through his connections within the department, he transitioned to private security work, taking night shift positions at corporate buildings. White's new job made him vulnerable. Working alone on night security shifts, he had developed a routine that made him easy to track. On February 12, 2023, Larry confronted him during one of these solitary shifts. Under intense pressure, White broke down and admitted his role in framing Derek. He detailed how Detective Steve Gordon had orchestrated the entire operation, from planting the murder weapon to fabricating the fingerprint analysis. The confession revealed that Gordon had specifically targeted the Johnsons because of their auto repair business's proximity to the murder scene. White explained how they had manipulated evidence, including falsifying police reports and tampering with crime scene photographs. He admitted to personally forging the fingerprint analysis documents that claimed to match Derek's prints to the planted murder weapon. The falsification process had been meticulous, designed to withstand superficial scrutiny, but not deep forensic examination. White also disclosed that the witness, Charlotte Green, had been carefully selected and coached by Gordon. The detective had paid her $5,000 to memorize a false testimony about seeing Derek near the crime scene. Gordon had chosen her because she lived in the area and would seem credible to the jury. Green had been instructed on specific details to include in her testimony that would corroborate the planted evidence. The former officer revealed how Gordon had maintained close relationships with several judges, including Judge Miller. These connections ensured that any defense challenges to the evidence would be quickly dismissed. The corruption extended beyond the police department into the prosecutor's office, where evidence that might have exonerated the Johnsons was deliberately suppressed. Multiple witness statements contradicting Green's testimony had been buried, and surveillance footage from nearby businesses that could have provided alibis for the Johnsons had mysteriously disappeared from evidence storage. Larry recorded White's entire confession using a concealed device. The former officer provided specific details about how the frame-up was constructed, including names of other officers involved, and dates when evidence was falsified. White explained that similar tactics had been used in other cases, though none had resulted in a death sentence. He revealed that Gordon had developed these methods over years, perfecting ways to manipulate evidence that would appear legitimate in court. During the confrontation, White also disclosed the current whereabouts and activities of other officers involved in the frame-up. Gordon had retired but maintained significant influence through his private investigation firm. Officers Jonathan Bates and several others remained active in the department, having been promoted despite their involvement in questionable cases. Judge Miller continued to preside over cases, his reputation untarnished by the numerous questionable convictions he had overseen. After the confrontation, White remained silent about Larry's visit. He understood that reporting the incident would require him to explain his own criminal actions in falsifying evidence. The statute of limitations for his crimes had not expired, and he feared prosecution. His confession had provided Larry with a comprehensive understanding of the corruption within Detroit's justice system, identifying every person who had played a role in his son's wrongful execution and his own unjust imprisonment. The details from White's confession gave Larry a clear picture of how thoroughly his family had been betrayed by the justice system. Every piece of evidence used to convict his son had been fabricated, every witness testimony coerced, and every legal protection deliberately undermined by those sworn to uphold the law. Following White's confession in February 2023, Larry Johnson focused on locating Steve Gordon, the detective who had orchestrated his son's wrongful conviction. Gordon had retired from the Detroit Police Department in 2015 and established his own private investigation firm, which primarily served corporate clients and wealthy individuals. Gordon's success in private sector work reflected his continued influence within Detroit's law enforcement community. His firm employed several retired police officers and maintained contracts with prominent businesses. This network of connections had helped him avoid scrutiny over his past misconduct. In March 2023, Larry began surveilling Gordon's daily routines. The former detective maintained a predictable schedule, regularly visiting local restaurants for lunch meetings and spending evenings at his office reviewing case files. Despite his wealth, Gordon preferred to work late hours alone, perhaps a habit from his police days. On March 28, Larry orchestrated a confrontation with Gordon at an abandoned industrial building where the former detective occasionally met confidential informants. Larry had learned of this location through careful observation and information gathered from White's confession. During the confrontation, Larry presented Gordon with detailed evidence of his corruption, including White's recorded confession and documentation of falsified evidence in Derek's case. Gordon initially attempted to dismiss the accusations, claiming everything had been done according to proper police procedure. As Larry pressed him, Gordon's demeanor changed. He admitted to orchestrating the frame-up, but attempted to justify his actions by claiming he had been under pressure to solve high-profile cases quickly. He revealed that falsifying evidence had become standard practice within certain units of the department, particularly in cases involving minority suspects. The situation escalated into physical violence. Larry, fueled by 20 years of pent-up rage, attacked Gordon. The beating was severe but calculated. Larry wanted Gordon to live with the consequences of his actions. The assault left Gordon with multiple fractures, a severe concussion, and injuries that would require extensive rehabilitation. Before leaving, Larry forced Gordon to reveal further details about the corruption network. Gordon disclosed that detailed records of numerous wrongful convictions were stored in his office safe. These documents included names of other officers, judges, and prosecutors who had participated in similar frame-ups over the years. Gordon also revealed that Judge Miller had been a key facilitator in their scheme. The judge had received regular payments to ensure that challenges to suspicious evidence were dismissed, and that maximum sentences were imposed in targeted cases. These payments were disguised as consulting fees for Miller's private legal practice. The former detective explained how they had selected their targets. They focused on individuals who lacked resources to mount strong legal defenses, or whose backgrounds could be manipulated to appear suspicious to juries. The Johnsons had been chosen partly because their successful auto repair business made them appear as potential rivals to local business interests. Larry learned that the corruption extended into the prosecutor's office. Several assistant district attorneys had knowingly presented falsified evidence and coached perjured testimony. They had developed a system for burying exculpatory evidence and manipulating grand juries to secure indictments. Gordon's admissions revealed that Derek's case was one of many. Over 2 decades, their group had orchestrated dozens of wrongful convictions, though Derek's was the only one that had resulted in execution. The profits from this corruption had been substantial, with payments coming from various sources interested in quick resolutions to criminal cases. The assault on Gordon sent shockwaves through Detroit's law enforcement community. While Gordon survived, his injuries forced him to close his private investigation firm and effectively ended his influence in local law enforcement circles. His hospitalization and subsequent rehabilitation would prevent him from continuing his corrupt practices. The investigation into the assault on Gordon was hampered by his own reluctance to cooperate with authorities. He refused to identify his attacker, likely fearing that any investigation would expose his past crimes. The incident remained officially unsolved, though rumors circulated within law enforcement about its connection to past cases. Following the Gordon incident in April 2023, Larry Johnson turned his attention to Jonathan Bates, a serving police officer who had actively participated in falsifying evidence in Derek's case. Unlike White and Gordon, Bates had remained with the Detroit Police Department, rising to the rank of sergeant in the homicide division. Through careful observation, Larry learned that Bates had developed a gambling problem, frequently visiting underground poker games after his shifts. This habit made him vulnerable and predictable. The officer's financial troubles had likely contributed to his willingness to participate in evidence tampering years earlier. On April 15th, Larry confronted Bates as he returned home from one of his gambling sessions. The encounter revealed additional layers of corruption within the department. Under duress, Bates admitted to personally planting evidence in multiple cases, including placing the murder weapon in the Johnsons' home. Bates attempted to justify his actions by claiming he had been following orders from Gordon and other superior officers. He revealed that evidence tampering had become an informal policy for clearing difficult cases, particularly those involving minority suspects. The practice had continued even after Gordon's retirement, though with more sophisticated methods. The confrontation turned violent when Bates tried to reach for his service weapon. Larry, anticipating this reaction, quickly subdued him. The ensuing beating was methodical and severe. Bates suffered multiple broken ribs, a shattered knee, and facial injuries that would require reconstructive surgery. During the assault, Bates provided crucial information about Judge Miller's role in the corrupt system. The judge had not merely been passive in accepting falsified evidence, he had actively participated in case planning meetings with Gordon's team. These meetings, held at private clubs, determined which cases would be targeted and how evidence would be manipulated. Bates revealed that Miller had received substantial payments for his cooperation, carefully laundered through his private legal consultation practice. The judge had developed a reputation within certain circles for ensuring desired outcomes in cases involving specific business interests or political connections. The officer also disclosed details about other corrupt officials still active in the system. Several prosecutors and police officers continued to manipulate evidence and coerce witnesses, though they had become more cautious following Gordon's retirement. Their methods had evolved to better withstand scrutiny from internal affairs and defense attorneys. Larry learned that Bates had maintained detailed records of the corruption as insurance against betrayal by his colleagues. These records, stored in a private storage facility, documented 20 years of systematic evidence tampering, witness intimidation, and judicial misconduct. Before leaving Bates incapacitated but alive, Larry retrieved the location of these records. The documents provided comprehensive evidence of the corruption network, including financial transactions, meeting dates, and names of all participants. This information would prove crucial in Larry's final confrontation with Judge Miller. The assault on Bates sent another clear message through Detroit's law enforcement community. Like Gordon, Bates refused to cooperate with investigators regarding his attacker. His injuries forced him to take early retirement from the police department, effectively ending his career in law enforcement. The incident heightened tensions among those who had been involved in wrongful convictions. Many began destroying records and distancing themselves from past cases, fearing they might be the next target. This atmosphere of fear disrupted ongoing corrupt practices as participants became increasingly paranoid about potential exposure. Bates's forced retirement and his unwillingness to identify his attacker created speculation within the department about connections to past cases. Internal affairs launched a cursory investigation, but with the victim refusing to cooperate and no witnesses coming forward, the case remained officially unsolved. By May 2023, Larry Johnson had gathered extensive evidence of judicial corruption from White, Gordon, and Bates. His final target was Judge James Miller, who had presided over Derek's trial and handed down the death sentence. Miller still served on the bench at Wayne County Circuit Court, having overseen numerous controversial cases throughout his career. Through surveillance, Larry learned that Miller maintained a carefully crafted public image. The judge participated in legal education programs and frequently spoke at law schools about judicial ethics. However, documents obtained from Bates revealed that Miller had received over $2 million in bribes during his career, disguised as consulting fees and speaking honorariums. Miller's security was minimal compared to Gordon and Bates. The judge lived alone since his divorce in 2019 and spent weekends at his isolated lakefront property. He typically arrived there Friday evenings and spent time reviewing case files in his home office. On May 20th, Larry confronted Miller at his weekend residence. He presented the judge with extensive documentation of his corruption, including financial records, meeting transcripts, and sworn statements from White and Bates. The evidence demonstrated Miller's central role in the wrongful conviction scheme. When faced with the evidence, Miller's judicial demeanor crumbled. He admitted to accepting payments for manipulating case outcomes, but attempted to justify his actions as necessary for maintaining order in Detroit's justice system. The judge claimed that expedited convictions had helped clear case backlogs and satisfy political pressure for crime reduction. Miller revealed that Derek's case had been particularly lucrative. Business interests connected to the murdered developers had paid substantial sums to ensure a quick conviction and maximum sentence. The judge had deliberately blocked defense motions that could have exposed the falsified evidence. The confrontation turned violent when Miller attempted to bargain for his life by offering to use his influence to expose the broader corruption network. Larry, unmoved by this attempt at manipulation, proceeded with his final act of vengeance. The assault was swift and fatal, ending Miller's life and his two-decade career of judicial corruption. Before his death, Miller provided final confirmation of the systemic corruption that had destroyed the Johnson family. He admitted to personally coordinating with Gordon to ensure that appeals would fail, and that evidence of police misconduct would never reach higher courts. The judge had also influenced the selection of Derek's court-appointed defense attorney, choosing someone known for providing inadequate representation. The murder scene revealed the extent of Miller's corruption. His home office contained detailed records of payoffs, coordinated evidence manipulation, and lists of cases where verdicts had been predetermined through collaboration with law enforcement. These documents implicated dozens of officials in a corruption scheme spanning more than 20 years. Law enforcement initially treated Miller's death as a robbery gone wrong, but the discovery of his records triggered a broader investigation. The documents provided evidence of systematic corruption that extended beyond Detroit into state and federal law enforcement agencies. Investigation of Miller's financial records after his death revealed millions in offshore accounts, properties registered under shell companies, and a network of illicit payments tied to convicted criminals and business entities. The extent of his corruption far exceeded what even Gordon and Bates had known. The judge's death marked the end of Larry's campaign of vengeance, but it also initiated the unraveling of Detroit's corrupt justice system. Miller's records, discovered during the homicide investigation, would eventually lead to multiple federal investigations and numerous convictions of corrupt officials. Larry felt no satisfaction in Miller's death. The execution of his son, the loss of his wife, and 20 years of imprisonment had left him emotionally hollow. His revenge had exposed extensive corruption, but could not restore what had been taken from him. The judge's death brought no peace, only a grim sense of completed obligation to his family's memory. Following Judge Miller's death in May 2023, Larry Johnson attempted to disappear. However, the evidence trail connecting the assaults on Gordon, Bates, and Miller's murder quickly led investigators to him. Federal authorities, recognizing the pattern of revenge against former law enforcement officials, launched a nationwide manhunt. By June 2023, private investigators hired by associates of the deceased judge tracked Larry to Minnesota. During an attempted capture at a motel, Larry engaged in a violent confrontation with bounty hunters. Despite sustaining gunshot wounds to his shoulder and leg, he managed to injure 3 of his pursuers before local police intervention led to his arrest. The subsequent trial in Detroit federal court attracted significant media attention. Larry declined legal representation, choosing to speak directly about the corruption that had destroyed his family. He provided detailed testimony about the systematic frame-up of his son, supported by evidence gathered during his campaign of revenge. Larry's testimony included White's recorded confession, Gordon's detailed admissions, Bates's documents, and Miller's extensive records of judicial corruption. This evidence revealed 2 decades of orchestrated wrongful convictions, forced confessions, and judicial manipulation that had pervaded Detroit's criminal justice system. The prosecution presented Larry's actions as calculated revenge killings, seeking maximum sentences for each assault and murder. However, the evidence of corruption he had exposed complicated the proceedings. Several jurors were dismissed after revealing connections to cases tainted by the exposed corruption. During his final statement, Larry spoke about Derek's execution in 2008 and his wife Kimberly's death in 2015. He described how the system had systematically destroyed his family while protecting corrupt officials who profited from wrongful convictions. His testimony implicated dozens of serving officials in ongoing corruption schemes. The presiding judge, acknowledging both the severity of Larry's crimes and the extraordinary circumstances that prompted them, sentenced him to life imprisonment without possibility of parole. The sentence reflected the premeditated nature of his actions, while noting the extensive corruption he had exposed. Federal investigations triggered by Larry's evidence led to widespread reforms in Detroit's criminal justice system. 38 officials faced criminal charges, including serving police officers, prosecutors, and 2 judges. Reviews of past convictions resulted in 17 exonerations, though these came too late for Derek Johnson. The documents recovered from Judge Miller's residence revealed corruption extending beyond Detroit. Federal task forces identified similar patterns of evidence tampering and judicial misconduct in other major cities, leading to nationwide investigations of law enforcement practices. Larry's imprisonment at Federal Correctional Institution Milan marked the final chapter of his story. Isolated in maximum security, he received news of the ongoing investigations and reforms his actions had sparked. However, these developments brought him no satisfaction. The execution of his son and loss of his wife left a void that no amount of revenge could fill. In his cell, Larry kept photos of Derek and Kimberly, reminders of the family destroyed by systemic corruption. His revenge had exposed deep-rooted corruption and triggered reforms, but the personal cost had been absolute. He had traded his freedom for revenge, leaving him alone with memories of what he had lost.